today we are talking about this week's Squiggly Careers podcast episode, which is about critical thinking. Sarah is not here. I've not got rid of her because she wasn't in the last one either. She is around. She's doing a session for Levi's on influencing. So we are going to talk together about critical thinking. Who listened? Let me know who listened to the podcast this week, and if you listened, what sort of stuff stuck. For everyone that is new, you don't have to have listened to join. I'm always just interested on what might have stuck. So let me quick kind of pop into chat. Integrated thinking, brilliant. So talked about this sort of cognitive foraging, which I thought was quite an interesting bit that we talked about. Framing concept, haven't listened, don't Sarah, do not worry. You can kind of come to PodPlus and not have listened. The framing idea. Brilliant. Problem statements. Yeah, we're going to talk a little bit about the problem statement stuff today. I'm going to bring in something actually that I didn't talk about on the podcast because I didn't want to steal Sarah's thunder. But there's something that I used to do with in my jobs in innovation with problem statements that I found useful. I thought I'd share it with you. Power of asking questions when new to a role. Yeah, Olivia, that's we talked about that. Okay, problem statements is take away from me. Brilliant. All right, well, let's talk a little bit more about critical thinking. Some very bad pictures of Sarah and me, because Vivi, who is, I think she's here, I think Vivi's in the team, manages all of our marketing. She, like, every week when we do these, she's like, take a picture of yourself. And so normally they're quite rushed and they get progressively worse. So here are two pictures of Sarah and me holding the books that we read, looking a bit scary. So I read Framers. Yeah, of course you do, Vivi. Of course you do. I read Framers, which is in the corner of my room behind me, and I really enjoyed that. And Sarah read the HBR Guide to Critical Thinking, which we are in. It's not actually out yet. I think it might be out on the 14th of February. Great Valentine's present, book on critical thinking. And our article that we wrote on making learning part of your everyday role, like making learning a routine, got featured in that, which is very exciting. And we took the insights from those two books into kind of our discussion about critical thinking in the podcast. I really like this quote, which came from Sarah's book. Simply using your brain for crossing off items of your to-do list is a poor use of a very sophisticated machine. Basically, this idea of critical thinking, and the thing that connects both of the books, was that it is a very human skill. And it is something quite special about what humans can do. My book took a bit more of and this is how you win versus the machine, as in like artificial intelligence and all that kind of. My book was like, this is the thing that humans need to invest in if we want to stay relevant in the context of technology getting increasingly smart. Chat GPT or whatever it is being an example of that. Like, our ability to do critical thinking is one of the ways that we will stay relevant and valuable. So this is a bit of a super skill for us to invest in. Yeah, I liked it too, Reg. So I thought, quick question. We all do different things. When do you think you use critical thinking in your job today? I'm curious. Head into chat and let us know. Like, when does this ability to, solve problems, to think about things from different perspectives, to use different frames, for example, to analyze what you're doing? Okay, so Vivi uses it when prioritizing. Yeah, what's most important, what's most relevant, what needs to get done first. New campaigns for consumers, Leon says. Yeah, so thinking about maybe customer needs. When asked for feedback, that's interesting, Caroline. So that's feedback, and you're kind of trying to really kind of think deeply about maybe what's useful and relevant for somebody. Comms, Sarah. Creating a marketing plan. Marketing, lots of marketing, everyone. Launching something new, Harriet. Implementing new regulation. Yeah, gosh, Emma, that must be complicated. Complicated and complex. I can definitely see why critical thinking would come in. Creating creative content for courses. Design and learning. Consultancy work with leaders, yeah, changing ways of working, new projects, loads of stuff. Organizational problems, negotiating, absolutely. I can definitely see it in negotiating as well, Claudia. In HR, James, yeah, understand different people and perspectives, data. There's loads of stuff, right? This is answering when the boss says why. Sarah sort of thinks she's my boss. She's not. She's my business partner. She thinks my boss. She asks why a lot. So I feel like my critical thinking brain gets engaged all the time. Cutting through lots of blah. Loads of things here. Finding new ways to offer clarity. Things get stuck. Yeah. Loads of ways. Okay, so I think we're basically saying it's an important skill in the jobs that we do today. We're a community doing lots of different things at work, and it seems to be a skill that's relevant for all of us. And also, I guess my point is, it is a skill that's going to be increasingly important for us all in the future. So important, one that is important to invest in. So I have a couple of different ideas for action, some taken from the podcast, some a bit of a build on what we talked about that I wanted to share with you. The first one that is, I've sort of retitled it because I like things that sound nice. So I've called it Name the Frame. There was some much more intelligent way of talking about this in the book Framers. But the idea here is that we all have certain frames that are automatic that we use when we are making decisions. So for example, one of my frames is very often about growth. So if I'm looking at Amazing If, for example, the frame that I often use when I'm thinking about the business is how do we grow? How do we grow in markets we're not in? How do we grow the podcast? How do I grow the number of people that come to PodPlus, for example? Like growth is a very automatic frame for me. But if I think about Sarah, business partner Sarah, for her, an automatic frame is often impact. It's, well, how do we increase our impact? So sometimes when we are talking to each other about, you know, where do we take, like this week, for example, we were still talking about book 3, everybody, people that were here last week, we are still talking about book 3. And I will often think about, well, how does book 3 help us to grow our business and grow our community? And she would often think, well, how does make sure the book 3 is as impact as possible, even if it doesn't grow our business? Now, what that can sometimes mean is you find that you have conflict in decisions because you're looking at it through a different lens, or you're using a different frame for your thinking. And the point is to name the frame that you're using, because it can help other people to understand where you're coming from. And it can also help you to adopt a different frame. So I might think, okay, well, if I be like very specific, the frame that I am using is growth. And that means that these are the ideas that I'm thinking through. If I try on your frame, impact, then it's almost like I can sit with you. Like if I sit with Sarah in this kind of impact frame, then I can come up with more ideas and I can think more in her world and I can understand more where she's coming from. So it's just about being specific. It reminds me a little bit with maybe this will come up with stress tolerance. So the last podcast recording in this series is on stress tolerance. And one of the things that I see quite a lot with stress is one of the most effective things to do is to name the emotion that you're feeling. So as soon as you name the emotion, like if I go, I'm feeling frustrated or whatever it is, it becomes more easy to manage. And I think that's a bit like this. If you name the frame you're looking through, like if I go, okay, what's driving me here? Okay, it's this frame of growth, then again, it becomes more easier to manage, easier to understand someone else's frame, easier to adopt a different one. So that was the first thing. Any reflections on naming the frame? Also might remind you what you talked about, explaining what you're doing. So Reg is picking up on something in our first podcast in this series on originality, that when we explain what we're doing, it's actually more effective for our learning. So I don't just go, oh, I'm trying to grow Amazing If. I'm kind of going, I'm trying to grow Amazing If and I'm coming at it from this perspective. I think perspectives, frames and lenses, to be honest, they're all getting at the same thing. So use the word that works for you. Hard to get something to rhyme with perspective though. Frames a bit easier. I think it does encourage different perspectives too. And also, you can imagine a team meeting, like what's the frame that informs your decision making? You can imagine like people kind of like, what's your main driver for how you make decisions? Could be an interesting. Second thing, instead of name the frame, constrain yourself, which sounds all kinds of dramatic. But in the podcast, there was when I was reading Framers, there's this really interesting example about this Dr. Seuss book. I don't know if this stuck in anyone's head that managed to listen to it. So this is a book I loved when I was younger. Green Eggs and Ham. Has anyone read it? I don't know if you read it. I love Green Eggs and Ham. Sam I Am. That's pretty much all I can remember. But anyway, the point is, this is one of the, I do not like Green Eggs and Ham. I do not like them, Sam I Am. I mean, no one needs me to recite this book to them. But the point is, it's one of the most successful children's books ever. And it came from a constraint. So I think Dr. Seuss was already doing quite well with his books. And then his publisher bet him that he couldn't write a children's book with under 50 words that were under one syllable. So Sam, I am. Yes, you get the idea. And he did. So he took this constraint of I can't use more than 50 words and every word has to only be one syllable. And he used that constraint to be basically, look at writing from a different perspective. And I thought that it was just a nice example because I had no idea that was how that book was written. And I loved that book. His name is Theodore Geisel. Is that the publisher? Oh, I did not know that, Rachel. You have new knowledge that you've added to me. But I was thinking about, what sort of constraints could we apply at work? So often timing. when something has to be delivered by, or budget. And these are like almost like made up constraints. These are like, okay, if we halved our budget, what would we do differently? If this had to be done by the end of next week, how would we do this? Or maybe even people. Can anyone think of any other constraints? I was like, what constraints could you play with at work? I was like, deadlines, who was involved, how much money you had. Oh, quality, really good one, Elaine. So if we like got it out the door and it was sort of 80% there. Scope. Yeah, I used to do this thing in innovation where this is when, used to work in the offices all the time. It would probably work fine virtually. We used to do it, I think it would probably work much better virtually. We used to get a rope. So you'd have a project and you'd talk about all the deliverables and you'd have the project team in the room, and then we'd put like a rope in the middle of the room, and you'd have to like put what was sort of in scope and out of scope, and the team would have to sort of agree that stuff. I think you could probably do it on Miro now much more easily. Very retro to use a rope in a meeting. Budget, yeah. So number of options versus outcomes. Lovely. The good enough thing, which is the quality. Brilliant. So yeah, maybe just something to play with, James. The Holy Trinity: time, quality, and effort. Yeah, I think I got taught that in project management. And on this point, actually, nod to Ali in our team, who is not here now. Ali says, this cropped up on our team's chat last week when we were talking about something. And I thought this was actually quite a nice prompt provocation in the same sort of lens as this bit here about constraining yourself. She said, how can we make this situation worse? So, often when you've got like a problem or a challenge, you're like, what can we do to make it better? And flipping it on its head and going, how can we make this situation worse? Suddenly goes, well, how? And then you get those answers and you can almost sort of solve from that perspective. I just thought it was quite a useful thing to play with. I don't think I've ever thought when I've been in a sticky situation, how could I make this worse? But I think it could sort of unlock some new thinking in your brain. So I like that one, and nod to Ali for that one. Kind of black hat approach. Yes. We talked a little bit about different hats, actually. I think maybe in the podcast that comes out next week from Six Thinking Hats, Edward de Bono. Okay, so I'm going to move on to Sarah's stuff now. Playing with the problem. So lots of you mentioned that problem statements was something that stuck to you from the podcast this week. So this is the idea that when we are thinking critically, the problem that we start with has a big impact on how we approach our thinking. And sometimes we rush ahead too fast with the problem we're trying to solve. So I might be like, the problem I'm solving in my head might be, how do I double the amount of listeners for the Squiggly Careers podcast? But maybe that's not the problem I'm trying to solve. Maybe if I played around with that problem statement a little bit more, like, how could people use the podcast more in their team meetings? Or how could the Squiggly Careers podcast be the most shared podcast in the world? So it's almost like if you take a different problem, you can think differently about it and come up with different ideas and different solutions. So perhaps spending some time playing with the problem might help you identify the right problem to be solved. The reason the ladder is here is because when I was taught to do this, I went on a really good course years ago at Cass Business School called the Michael Programme. It's actually really good. They do scholarships, by the way. So if anyone wants to look this up, they do scholarships for it. The Masters in Innovation, Creativity and Leadership. Really cool course. Did like a module on screenwriting, which I'd never done before. You do a module on design thinking, and we did a module on innovation, and I'd done a few jobs in innovation. Anyway, they talked about this idea of the ladder of inference. The ladder of inference. And it's quite a good way. I think I've adapted it slightly. So if you actually Google the ladder of inference, it sounds a bit more academic than what I'm about to say, but it comes from that. And the idea here is that when you've got a problem, so let's say that I've got the squiggly double, let's just take this one because hopefully as podcast listeners, it's one that you can understand. Let's say I'm like, the problem is like doubling the Squiggly Careers listeners. We're about to reach 3 million downloads. So how do we reach 6 million in the next 12 months? Let's say that. Now, I could just try and solve that problem, or I could play around with it just to see whether that's the right problem to solve. And you use the ladder of inference in order to do that. So you go up the ladder by asking why. Well, why do you want to double the number of Squiggly Careers podcast listeners? And I might say, so that more people know about Squiggly Careers. Well, why do you want more people to know about Squiggly Careers? So that I can make people happier at work. Well, why do you want to make people happier at work? because mental health is a big issue and work contributes significantly to that. Like I could keep going with my whys. Now, any one of those answers could be the problem. How do we help people to have better mental health? How do we make workplaces happier places to be? So that, I mean, they're different problems. They're very big problems, but they're different problems that I could start to solve. And so when you ask why, they become bigger, and you might unlock different thinking. And if you want to make it smaller, you do how. So you get into kind of a bit more tactical stuff. So I might say, well, how could I double Squiggly Careers podcast listeners? I could throw money at it. I could advertise. I could bring more famous people onto the podcast. I don't know, I'll keep going. But again, any of those answers could be something that you could then work with. Okay, so if I was going to throw money at it, what would that look like? How would we do it? How much would it be? All that kind of stuff. If I was going to bring more famous people, etc., maybe I need to hire I don't know, celebrity podcast booker. We're not going to do that, everybody. But you get the idea. Like you take these problems can go up and become bigger and go down and become smaller. And each of those answers could be another thing that you can play with. And the point really here is it worth spending 10, 15 minutes doing this with your team to play with a problem? You could do it really easily with Post-its. Let's go up, let's go down. And then you pick the problem. Okay, so having played with it, let's pick the problem we're going to take forward. And it might be the original one that you stated, but you might also go in a different direction because you've done this. That's so interesting. The why makes it bigger, the how makes it smaller. Yeah, I've always just found it useful. And it also, at the very least, it gets people to think a bit more deeply about the problem they're solving. Even if you stick out with what you started with, I think just this idea that the problem is not always the obvious one that we're trying to solve. It just makes people think about it. Yeah. Oh, and on to that, Julia, it makes me think of the differences in how people approach problem solving as if by magic. The final thing I want to talk about is this idea of problem solving perspectives. So Sarah talked about when you are trying to solve problems and think critically, it's useful to think about your own perspective and also the perspectives of other people that you might bring into the situation. So if I'm just thinking, if I'm doing my critical thinking with loads of people that think like me, then we're probably going to get into a bit of a thinking echo chamber pretty quickly. But if I understand my problem-solving perspective, it might help me to bring a bit more diversity into the discussion. So I have looked at some different problem-solving perspectives. I was going to ask you to vote on which one you feel like is you after this, actually. Let me just hide names so that when I ask you, it's all anonymous. So problem perspective number one is the thinker. So you solve problems by, you dive deep into your cognitive resources and you think about this stuff. That's how you naturally approach problem solving. Then there's the detective who hunts out the details. Well, why and how and who did this before? And you collect all of that stuff. Number three is the adventurer. Well, let's just try it. One way that we can solve problems is we can just give it a go and see what happens. So maybe that's more of your approach. Number four is the listener. Maybe you solve problems because you're listening to other people. You're gathering a bit more, sort of not thinking about it, but you're kind of creating your own conclusions by what you're hearing from other people. And number five is the visionary. Well, what if? How could we? Why don't we think about it like this? So you're really, really zooming out from this problem. And out of interest, what do you think you are? So regular PodPlusers, stars on screen now. New people, we are going to do this by what we call annotating. There's a function in Zoom that lets you put stars on a screen. So the way that you get to this is head to the top of your Zoom screen. It will say view options. Click on that. And then it will say annotate. And then it will say stamps. And then you want to do the star, basically. So a few options: annotate, stamp, and star. Brilliant. Lucy has put that in the chat. So if you want to just follow it, you can see how to do it there. Ooh, what have we got? What do we think we are? Can you be more than one? Probably, Nicola, probably. Actually, the thing I'm going to tell you about in a minute is a free survey, which tells you what you are. And then it does it your primary, secondary, and thirdly, primary, secondary, what would you say? Primary, secondary, and the one after that. It gives you an order. Tertiary, yeah, is it tertiary? I was like, I feel like I used to say that in geography lessons. Is that a different way of tertiary? Anyway, the third one, it's less important. So yes, you can be, but I think there's a preference. No standout results from this, I would say. from our own perspectives, we are all a bit of both. I was a bit disappointed. So there's a survey you can do. I'm going to show it now. But if I had self-identified in some kind of egotistical way, I would have wanted to be the adventurer or the visionary. And that is not how I came out on this survey. So let me just clear your stars. This is a survey that you can take. It's free to take. It's called Decisive. But I'll put the link there for you. So it's app.areamethod.com. I mean, they could maybe have a snappier URL, but app.areamethod.com. Pretty quick to do. And it will help you to take this test. I came out as the detective. I was like, really? My team, but it's interesting, isn't it? Like if you do this on yourself, you have your own self-perception, right? I'd quite like my team to do it for me with their perspective on how I solve problems and see whether we get to the same answer. Because obviously you have your own view of your abilities and it's not necessarily aligned with how other people see it. So that could be interesting as well. Maybe do this for yourself and then get someone else to do this with you in mind and see whether the results align. But useful to do. Also, if you get rid of the app bit and you just type in areamethod.com, there is quite a lot of information on that website about problem solving. That is quite interesting if you want to dive in a bit more deeply. So in summary, this is what we talked about. This is like a new thing that I did this morning. I don't know if this is helpful, everybody, but I thought maybe if you wanted to screenshot something to summarize some of the things we talked about. I mean, the pod sheet sort of does this for you as well, but there's some extra stuff in here that isn't in the pod sheet. And I wondered, let me know if you think this is useful, because I've just tried to summarize all those different things we talked about so that you can maybe save it on a page, or by all means share it on social media so it gets out there more, whatever works for you. But let me know. It's okay, you like it. Oh, maybe we will do this again. Sarah will be like, I don't want to do this every week. I will do this. Okay, cool. All right, I'm glad you like it. So that was it, everything that I was going to share this week. Obviously, in addition to this, as I said, you've got the pod sheet. So that summarizes it. It's got some more quotes in there. It's got some coach yourself questions for a bit more reflection. So that might be useful as well. And Podmail, you can always sign up to Podmail. All the details are on our website under the podcast page. Didn't grab screen. Don't worry, Caroline. Screen grab away. Any other questions? Let me know. Next week's podcast is on social influence. I'm not sure if it's going to be me or Sarah or both of us that are going to be here to talk about that. Can we watch a recording of this somewhere? Yes, Claire, this is recorded. The recording is on YouTube. So we've got a YouTube channel, and all the recordings of PodPlus actually go on the YouTube channel. And we also share it in PodMail every week. So in next week's PodMail, there'll be the link to this recording. So whatever works for you. If you just look for Squiggly Careers, oh, there you go. Vivi's on the case. There is the link to the Squiggly Careers channel where all of this stuff goes. No problem at all. So yeah, next week we're talking about social influence. Funny topic. I read a book. Heads up, I read a book about the techniques of social influence, which felt a bit Machiavellian, like the different things that you can do. But if you like that kind of stuff, could be a good listen. Sarah's book was more about how the world that we are in influences us. So sort of influence from a couple of different perspectives. I haven't heard the edit yet, so I don't know how much sense we made, but you can let us know this time next week. But I will leave it there for now. Claudia, I'm really glad. Thank you, regular PodPlusers. I hope everyone that is new will come back for some more learning with us soon. And I hope you have a brilliant rest of your week, everybody. Bye for now. Take care. See you soon. Bye, everyone. Bye.